There are some opinions that some people should rather keep to themselves, but a lot of people don't. They prefer to let everybody know exactly what they're thinking. Now, some of these opinions, when they're stated, people like to pull them back and pretend like, oh no, it doesn't matter what I said before. But, you know, say it and then move, or don't say it at all, because you will end up apologizing.
All right, everyone. So in this video, I want to talk to you guys about a place called Africa. Now, what is my opinion about this place? Well, Africa sucks, okay?
Here we go. Another one. By the way, there's still, I have to play another person who also has the same opinion.
I'm basically saying what everyone else already knows and what everyone else already thinks. Africa sucks.
Okay, so let's start with a couple things. Firstly, Africa is a continent, which means you're talking about several different places. That's like me saying America sucks because look at some of the gangs and cartels all over the place. America sucks as a continent because look at what they're doing in Brazil. Like bringing all the places together is ridiculous. You can't put an entire continent together and criticize one place, an entire continent. It's just ridiculous. And I'm not even trying to be on some, happy-go-lucky Africa is kind of cool type of stuff. Like you really have no idea the places that are in South Africa or the wealth that is in Nigeria or Egypt or Namibia. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make when people say Africa as a continent. They tend to remove some of the northern parts. Africa is a continent that includes islands.
People in Africa know that Africa sucks. And
Okay, so if Africa sucks, tell that to this guy who lives in Cape Town in South Africa.
I spend 4 months a year in Cape Town, where even though I'm in Cape Town, my house is 12,000 square feet. I have a steam room, sauna, I have a full home CrossFit gym, 2 security guards on rotation. I have a full-time chef who cooks me 3 meals a day. I have tried my best in Cape Town to spend more than $30,000 a month. I can't. I physically, I go to every single restaurant. I try to look for the most expensive bottle of wine. I've never been able to find anything more than $100. Right?
Really?
Cape Town is so cheap, man. It's insane.
please spare me this talk about how, oh, Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Yeah, we all know that.
We don't all know that. There are plenty of Americans and Europeans and people who have heard say Africa as a country, not as a continent. So you're already wrong about that. But, I suspect you're going to have a whole lot more incorrect statements in the rest of what you're saying.
But that does not change the fact that the continent itself sucks, okay? The continent of Africa sucks.
Okay, so you've already said that, and that's fine. You can have whatever opinion you have, but what evidence are you using to try and draw that conclusion? Like, does the weather suck? Is that what you have a problem with? You don't like moderate weather? You don't like slight rain with a lot of sun? You don't like being able to go to the beach year round? You don't like not having snow all over the place? What do you object to about Africa that makes it suck so bad?
did a video earlier about why India sucks. Now I'm doing a video on why Africa sucks.
Why the hell you say that India sucks? What are you talking about? Do you even know anything about India? Are you aware of the many? First of all, they've got billions of people there, so you're already talking about something that is very crazy. Secondly, they're one of the richest countries on the planet. And then thirdly, you're talking about areas. I think the one thing that he's making a mistake about is inequality. He thinks because there's some people who live in Africa who are not equal to the people who have a lot of money, right? The difference between the haves and the have-nots is huge in Africa. And he mistakes that for Africa, the continent itself, sucking. I mean, where I live definitely doesn't suck. You would pay a lot of money to live where I live, and y'all will be shocked to know that I don't.
And who knows, maybe one day I'll do a video on why Europe sucks. Maybe when another war breaks out in that continent.
Well, buddy, it's time then. By the way, saying that every single place sucks, like, oh, I'm going to make a video about Europe sucks and how America sucks and then Africa sucks and India sucks. If every place sucks, then that's not a real opinion. That's just you being a douchebag, really.
So I did a little bit of research today on Africa. I know, like,
Oh, that's good. It's always good to do one day's research so that you can give your entire opinion on an entire continent based on one day's research. That's usually shows that you have a sincere opinion. If you take one day off, do research on an entire continent, and then go, yeah, that entire continent sucks because I did one day's research.
why are you doing research on this place? We all know it sucks. What's the point of doing research? Well, I want to, get my stats together. Want to get my stats arranged and get some,
Yeah. Did you guys know that every 60 seconds a minute goes by in Africa? Let me tell you something about these stats that people read. A lot of people don't even understand stats. Like when they read stats to you, like they're not even understanding what they're reading. They're not even understanding what they're talking about. Um, do you know that the real read the I had a debate, right, with one of my people, right? And we had a debate about how do you determine what places, like where you should go. Like, should you go to Tajikistan? Should you go to North Korea? Should you go to Australia? How do you determine that? Stats is one way, but it's not the full picture. Another way is to get proper information from people who've already lived in that area, because stats only tells you so much, and a lot of people, they relate their places to their own. So in America, right, if I tell you that, in some places in America, average house will be, I don't know, I'm just gonna make it up, like $500,000 in some areas, and then I tell you that the same exact type of house that you see in America, that's 500,000, in an equivalent area in some parts of Africa is going to be about $50,000, right? This is something that's just known. Like billionaires, millionaires, they come to Africa, they buy mansions for nothing, right? And they live in those areas where there's virtually no crime. In areas in Africa where there's virtually no crime, it's well guarded. Not the house itself, but the entire area is well guarded and stuff like that. I mean, very important people live in those areas. And then you take that little bitty piece of information, you move to Africa, thinking that you're going to buy a house for cheap, thinking that you're going to move in. You're going to get there, live in an area with high crime. You came with little money, thinking that you can just do whatever you like, and then things don't turn out the way you think. And then, of course, there's forms you have to fill out. You don't just get given a house. There's forms you have to fill out. You have to explain that you're not going to be an alien that's going to come into the country and then leave. You're not just there to mess up the economy and stuff like that. There's so much going on in real life that you cannot get just by looking at statistics or looking at information or looking at that. You have to actually go there. That's why I humbly talk about other places around the world. I don't sit there and be like, oh, I know everything, because it's like, if you haven't been there, you've only got half the picture. Stats matter. Don't get me wrong, statistics matter, but there's a difference between statistics on things that you don't need to be around versus things you need to be around.
concrete facts and information about Africa before I explain why this place is a total. Here we go. So, for one thing, the GDP of Africa.
Here we go. So, of course, they're going to mention GDP, which a lot of people don't even understand GDP at a deeper level. They just want to talk about GDP from the standpoint of how much does the average person earn, which, of course, if you know anything about inequality, the average person in South Africa, or Africa in general — I keep saying South Africa, I don't know why — but Africa in general is going to be brought down by the people who are extremely poor. It's like saying, the average person in America earns, uh let's say, 30,000 a month, $30,000 a month. It's like that's different than saying that people in America don't earn more than that. Somewhere it will be like 60% of people will earn that, and then the another 30 will earn hundreds of thousands, and then another, you know, 10% will earn different, and another 10 will earn different than the 1% and all of that. But then, of course, these people, they don't put that into it. But when you talk about GDP, especially of a country, you're talking about consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. This matters because the raw numbers don't mean anything. For example, some of the stuff that, Africa gets from America, they get for cheap. The same stuff that Americans will purchase, they'll purchase it at a much higher rate, which is why some very smart people in America, they just purchase it from Africa. They go, oh, let's just have factories in Africa, let's just have factories in China, let's just have factories elsewhere. Why would I purchase it? So the same stuff that you think is like expensive is going to be cheap. And I'm talking about laptops, I'm talking about cars, I'm talking the same car you think you're going to buy for expensive in another area, you come to another place, it becomes cheap. And that's because, of course, there's demand and supply. And of course, you can't sell something for very expensive if the people just don't have that amount of money. And so one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is just looking at the raw numbers. Now, another thing some people don't understand is livable wages. Some people don't realize that livable wages in different parts is going to be different, very different. And of course, I like to mention the needs first, because those are the most important. Like, how much do you pay for water? How much do you pay for electricity? How much? And there are parts in Africa, right, where there isn't electricity, isn't water, isn't any other stuff, right? But those places, even though they encompass a lot of people, because there's still inequality in Africa, those places, they skew the statistics. So let's see if this genius puts any of that into the equation, or is just gonna go, they earn this much and it's not very much. You know that scammers have started moving into South Africa. I mean, I'm going to use South Africa as an example. Like, Asian scammers from China and all these places have started moving into South Africa because they started realizing that South Africans, on average, earn a lot of money.
I don't want to get into the GDP of one African country or a handful of African countries, because there are dozens of countries in Africa.
Oh, that's good. You want to do your research, but you don't want to get into the research of each country in Africa. That shows that you're not lazy. That shows that you're willing to take the time, the one day, to go and look at an entire continent and average the entire continent out. That shows a lot of respect. By the way, have you noticed that Africa has to deal with that? That Africa has to sort of apologize for the entire continent rather than each piece of the countries standing up for themselves. This is why the whole, oh yeah, we're going to separate ourselves from the diaspora. It's like, this is how they look at you. They're not playing the game of this one country. They're looking at the entire thing.
So I don't want to get into like the GDP of Uganda. We're not going to get into that.
Well, it took me all of 10 seconds to Google it on Google, and it's about 53.65 billion. Now, of course, before you start looking at this and thinking about it, like, oh, what does this mean? Obviously, there's a lot of poverty in Uganda. There's a lot of inequality in Uganda. The way that a lot of people live in urban areas is very different than how people live in rural areas. You have to consider the population. You have to consider prices of things. You have to consider anything that is happening, politics that's happening over there, before you start talking about the country. But that's only if you care, right? If you give a damn about the thing you're talking about, then you have to start considering those. But if you want to just talk about an overall continent and just make a video that just for no reason attacks an entire continent of people, then you do what he's doing.
Let's get into the GDP of the whole of Africa. What does this continent make as far as GDP goes?
So before he gives us the results of GDP, I want to give this small snippet from a longer video. You can find it on YouTube. I'll link it in the description, which talks about GDP and why you can't always just trust GDP. I mean, I don't know who was the first person who just told this word to the average person, but then somehow people ran with it like, oh, GDP means this one's poor and this one's rich, and that's it. That's all that matters. Of course, not counting anything else. But here's a snippet of a video where a bunch of people are saying that Mississippi is richer than all of the European countries.
No offense to Mississippi, but come on now. Measuring a country's gross domestic product per capita and comparing it to the US has made for some pretty emotionally charged headlines over the years. Another metric that I think helps to complete the picture that GDP per capita is often trying to paint. The Gini coefficient, or Gini index, is the most commonly used measure of inequality. Developed by Italian statistician Corrado Gini, it measures inequality on a scale from 0 to 1, where higher values indicate higher inequality. A value of 0 indicates perfect equality. Everyone has the same income. A value of 1 indicates perfect inequality.
So I'll tell you from my perspective why this matters more than anything else. Because in any country, you can have extremely rich people. I mean, even the most low down countries that you can think of, you have rich people who live in those countries, who fly abroad, who keep their money offshore, who keep their money in offshore banks, who have trillions, but you would never know it. And then they come back to their own country where there is nothing but poverty. Inequality is a much better metric to count. You're not going to get anything by just saying that the country itself is poor. And yes, places like India, Africa, South America, and a lot of places like that, Asia, are going to have, I mean, Greece is another one, are going to have this wobble of money, right, where the inequality is bigger. And the reason why, because when you're trying to fix the wealth of a country, when you're trying to make it a place where people want to live, not just if you want to look at a piece of paper and say this country's got a lot of money, when you want to fix where people want to live, you want to make sure that there's people who are not so poor that they're going to attack you at the site, at the sight of you. They go money and they attack you. That's what you're trying to fix for. That's why inequality is more important than just, whatever. Because again, I mean, if you take a tribe, for example, right? What's that old saying? Comparison is the thief of joy. If you take a tribe and everybody in that tribe has about the same amount of money, right? Then people are basically equal in that area. And there's not that many people who you could consider rich or poor, but they're living a pretty okay life, really. They're living a pretty okay life. But if you take people who live in tribes and then you compare them to people who live in buildings and cities and stuff like that, the inequality matters because the people in the cities can easily dictate what happens to those people who live in tribes, while those people in tribes have virtually no say. This is why it matters.
What does this continent collectively make together? Because if Africa is so great, and with all of the resources that Africa has, this place should be kicking everybody's ass. Africa should be defeating Europe. It should be defeating North America, South America. It should be kicking China's ass. It should be kicking everybody's ass. The Middle East should be on its knees.
Okay, so I'll give him credit for this part, at least, that Africa, as he has just acknowledged, is a wealth-rich nation. In other words, or a wealth resource rich nation, meaning that most of the stuff that comes out of the continent are plenty where it's few in other continents. We're talking from gold and diamonds and uranium, all these things that are very important things that are in your cell phones and your food or whatever, very important. Now, why is it that these things don't make Africa rich, even though they get mined in Africa and end up internationally in different places? Palm oil is another one. Why does it remain poor? Well, it's because, like I said, they're taking the resources and selling them for cheap, or in some cases, the companies from America, they're coming in Africa, America, China, those places, they're coming in Africa. They're basically bribing the government or whoever government official, and then they're taking the resources for very, very cheap and then getting out of there. Africa could literally put a stop to that and go, no, you're not getting these resources for as cheap as you want. And then the country's GDP would rise in a stupid way. But why would they do that when they could get slave labor offshore, basically out of their continents, out of their countries. That's why Africa is poor, because of corruption based both inside and outside of it, controlled. And by the way, when people come in and they try to fix that, bam, it's happened plenty of times. The name, by the way, for this is neo-colonialism. And some of the greatest leaders in Africa were removed because of this agenda.
If we knew the reasons behind this coup, as we've all gotten to know through the CIA, the documents which have come out, then I would have regretted I took part, or maybe supported it going. Because I think that had destroyed the path of growth of Ghana.
But did you take part in the coup?
I didn't take part as a soldier. I was in the air with my fighter plane.
To stop them?
To stop them. And we didn't stop them. We didn't have instruction to stop them.
So you mean you regret that you even allowed them to do what they did?
Yes. After hindsight,
yeah,
we had come back only about 2-3 months. And the things Ghanaians were complaining about, we didn't see it. I must be honest, that there was no sugar, milk, the rest. It didn't affect me. I went to the officers' mess, I ate. But now I think the whole country has gotten to know that it was CIA propaganda which instigated the coup against Nkrumah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the presence of the powerful African warlords. So let's get right into this. So the GDP of Africa is over 2 trillion.
Yes, it is. It is just over, well, it's nearly 3 trillion.
That's it. Over 2 trillion. That's the GDP of Africa. This entire continent, this ginormous continent, it's gigantic, this place, with all of its oil, diamonds, all sorts of, with all the resources that this continent has, it produces just a little bit over 2 trillion.
Now, do you want to know why? Because there is an answer. So if you want to know one thing, right, in talking about putting Africa in a continent as one. So let's look at it. So it's about 2.8 trillion together as the African continent. But these three pull the majority, or at least 1/3 of that. So South Africa, 400 billion, Egypt, about 400 billion, and Algeria, about 263 billion. If you add these together, you get about 1 trillion. So 1 trillion is by 3 countries in Africa. And then, of course, you got Nigeria, Kenya, and, you can go down the list, and then you'll get another 3. And so, in other words, you're getting some countries that have very small GDPs, which are being compared to some very large countries. I mean, look at the size of some of these countries and their populations, and then you will compare. I mean, South Africa has only 50 million people, which is way less than Nigeria, even though we have about 3 times the amount of their GDP. But if you count by number of billionaires in dollars, you will see that South Africa is number 1, obviously, but Nigeria is number 2 with Egypt, which is weird. It's like, okay, how come Nigeria has less money? Again, comes down to inequality. Understand what I'm saying? Inequality also shows you how possible is it to go from poor to rich. And in a lot of these countries, it's very hard. If you're part of the middle class, you've got a much better chance of reaching the top. But if you're poor, you're probably going to stay poor for the rest of your life, and your kids and your kids' kids, and if that continues.
Now, I thought, okay, let's do some comparisons here. So the nation of Mexico has a population of 127 million people.
This is the best example that he could have given. I couldn't have asked for a better example. So basically, he pulls up Mexico. So in Mexico, about 40% of the population in 2020 lived in abject poverty. Now it's about 34% of the population that lived in abject poverty. Now compare that to Uganda, which was also 43% of the people who lived in poverty, which, by the way, tells you that just the raw number of your GDP is not necessarily what's going to tell you what's going on in your country. So, although Mexico has 1.8 trillion in their GDP, you're talking about a level of corruption that is crazy. Most of their money is in the 1%'s hands.
Over 1 billion people live in Africa. All right, 1 billion people live in Africa. Over that. So it's comparable to.
While it is true that over 1 billion people live in Africa, 40 to 47% of them are under the age of 18 years old.
The populations of China and India. So a little bit over 1 billion people live in Africa, and the GDP of Africa is over 2 trillion. 127 people live in Mexico. What's the GDP of Mexico? 1.3 trillion.
Right. So by that metric, Mexico is a perfect country, right? Compared to Africa as a continent. I mean, let's not even play the game right now. Let's just analyze it easily. We know that a bunch of people are trying to run away from Mexico. We know there's a whole bunch of corruption and crime in Mexico. We know that there's even child labor in Mexico. And again, this is not to downplay Mexico. I'm sure there's a lot of great places in Mexico. But if you're going to do this thing of like, oh, look at the differences, you're just looking at how much money the entire country makes, not considering anything else.
So Mexico, with 127 million people, is already making roughly half of what Africa makes in GDP.
So I wasn't going to do this part, but I guess let's just use AI for a second because I don't want to sit there and calculate it myself, but I know the answer already. But if you take Africa's cost of living, right, and you compare it to its already, its GDP that already exists, it actually changes dramatically. So let's read it. Africa's gross domestic product, adjust for the cost of living, also known as GDP, at purchasing power parity, PPP, is estimated to be approximately 10.8 trillion in 2025, significantly higher than the nominal GDP of about 2.8 trillion. This PPP figure reflects the actual buying power of the continent's combined economic, indicating that 10.8 trillion in PPP can purchase a larger amount of goods and services within Africa than the equivalent nominal amount could in the global markets. Again, I'm going to say this again. It matters how much the cost of living is in your country, because someone who's barely making it in another country is going to be thriving in Africa at an equivalent rate. And so looking at raw numbers gives you the wrong impression. Like I said, if you look at the poverty rate in Mexico and you compare it to other countries in Africa, you would think that, Africans should be like at 80% poverty.
Mexico is kicking Africa's ass. Okay, Mexico, the country that people are trying to escape from. People are traveling hundreds of miles to get out of Mexico, to cross the border into Texas, California, to get the hell out of Mexico. Mexico is kicking Africa's ass.
So doesn't that tell you that having a high GDP on its own is not good enough? You literally have just said the answer yourself. By the way, a lot of the people who are leaving from Mexican border are not actually from Mexico. They're from other South American countries that make about the same GDP as Africa, nominal GDP.
Okay? Do not say that about Africa. Africa is a very good country. Mexico is an inferior country to Africa.
Why is he pulling an Indian accent? What's that got to do with Africa?
Africa is Africa is the motherland of all of humanity. And they used to teach me that crap when I was in high school.
Oh, you're just angry that Africa happens to be the cradle of mankind. Is that why you're angry? Why are you angry about that? That's just facts. And it's got nothing to do with GDP. Do you think that if Africa had a higher GDP, that would be the cradle of mankind?
Used to say, oh, Africa is the birthplace of all civilization. It's where all civilization began. All human civilization began in Africa. And I'm like, how? I don't believe that. Well, man, because the pyramids was built by Africans, man. The pyramid, yeah. I could.
Oh, so this literally is about the history of Africa. I thought it had something to do with a genuine, maybe a want to change the continent, which I would suggest then investing in the African countries, though, the ones that you don't even want to look up as individuals, because that would completely change your point of view once you understand the middle class versus the poor versus the raw numbers between different countries that you think are rich, and also the freedoms that exist in some of these countries. Most countries in Africa are democracies, but we'll get back to that in another video. But he's talking about Egypt, right? I showed you the GDP of Egypt, right? So if you want to say that Egypt, forget if they're black. Let's say the ancient Egyptians are Middle East. They're the people who are there today, right? You want to see the difference then? Do you want to see the difference? What happens when you get colonized? Let's do it. You're about to see it. Egypt, right? Pyramids, the greatest countries ever. Let's do it.
Okay, I could believe that Africans built the pyramids, right? African slaves built the pyramids.
We're going to get into it. Let me first get his whole point of Egypt out, and then we can do the history, right? Let's do the history of Egypt. Since people like denying colonization, sub-Saharan Africa, let's go to Egypt. I want you to see the difference here. I want you guys to learn something that is very scary. And I'm going to make an individual video about Egypt after this.
I could believe that. But the people who were running the empire of Egypt were not black.
Okay, good. You can believe whatever you want to believe. Again, this is going to go into my point. Obviously, I think they were black, but let's just keep going down this line so that we can see exactly what his point is, because apparently in his mind, Egypt is no longer part of Africa, but you'll see.
That's just a fact. They weren't. The pharaohs was not black. We was not kings. That's all a lie that you made up in your head. It's a fantasy that you made up in your head so that you can have something to be proud about.
Good. We've got the memes going. He's saying the exact same thing that everybody else says, tells you how independent his thought is. And again, he's still making the mistake of thinking that he's got a good point. But again, let's wait for him to finish his point on Egypt. I want to get to the real point here so that you can understand exactly what I'm talking about. So when these people try to play this game of Africa this, Africa that, you can understand exactly what we're talking about.
The reality is that the elites of Egypt, the pharaonic elites who ruled Egypt, were genetically related to Semites and Indo-Europeans. I mean, there was more the elites ruling Egypt were genetically related to people of Semitic makeup and also more so European makeup as well.
So you're basically saying that they're the same as the population that is there today, right? That's what you're saying. By the way, hurry up. I'm itching to get to my point.
But they weren't, they weren't King Ungugu ruling over Africa and his royal entourage of hunters from Kenya. Like that wasn't happening.
Wait, how does he know King Ngungu? This guy must have done way more research than I thought.
Anyway, moving on to more stats here. So Brazil.
Okay, good. So let's use the stats we've already used right now. Let's talk about Egypt. So basically, he said that the majority of the people living in Egypt were Semites, and they ruled, and they had nothing to do with sub-Saharan Africa. And therefore, the people of Egypt were the richest country that ever existed up until the Mamluks, up until even when the Turks took over, those people were the richest people in the world. Well, let's do the calculations. I'm not even going to disagree with that. Let's just start with that in mind. So let's start by shattering one of his dreams. So people who are living in Egypt right now, in the majority, are Semites, right? They have Indo-European DNA. They have uh, Middle Eastern DNA, whatever, Semite DNA, Mediterranean DNA. Those are the people living in Egypt today, right now. You know, the type of people that will not suffer the Ungungu curse, as he says. So let's start the clock. Okay, so we start with ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt has the benefits of being one of the wealthiest places. So we're starting with the mentality that these are Semitic people, right? They have farming, they have all of that going for them. They're farming, they have gold, they have metals, they have all kinds of things that surpass most civilizations around the world. Africa, the Americas, Europe, even Asia is only, a step behind, but it's still behind. They invent glass, they invent all of these things in Egypt that would only be discovered thousands of years later in other areas. They're way ahead, right? Meanwhile, at the same time, Africans from South Africa, let's take South Africa versus Egypt, are living in basically hunter gatherer ways. As of yet, there haven't been any farmers or anything like that who have moved into this region. So let's look at what they look like today in GDP. Okay, so let's look at these two places. So the GDP of South Africa is 400 billion, which is only a few hundred million bigger than Egypt, which is 389 billion. But wait a minute, Egypt was way ahead. What do you think happened between ancient Egypt and today that could have made Egypt lose so much money, especially given the fact that, right, we're starting with the premise that the people who built the pyramids were Semites, right? The people who then invaded in the Islamic age were Semites again, and they basically inherited a wealth that was insane and built the greatest empire. If you don't know, the Mamluks, right? Egypt was so strong that they could beat back the people who beat up the Abbasids, the people who beat up the Chinese, who were the only equivalent places at the time, right? There's Mali, there's Egypt, there's the Abbasid Caliphate, and then you also have China, and then of course you have Byzantine Empire. Those are the giant powers during the day, and Egypt was one of them. As we can read, Muslim rulers nominated by blah 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 blah. The Mamluks continued to govern the country of conquest of Egypt by the Ottoman Turks in 1517, after which it became a province of the Ottoman Empire. The mid 14th century, Black Death killed about 40% of its population. An important thing to keep in mind when you talk about the modern population. And so, how did the wealthiest country to ever exist, ancient Egypt, end up with less than South Africa in GDP? Since we're drawing this historical conclusion, what do you think happened? What do you think South Africa and Egypt have in common? In that sense, the fact that their GDP is low in compared to the rest of the world. What do you think happened to them? Could it be that colonization ruined Egypt because the type of colonization that Europeans brought, including Turks who are Europeans, was way different than the type of colonization that the Egyptians had brought in the past? Well, let us read. He also refers to the seizure of some valuable manuscripts from famous schools and libraries. Ibn Iyaz summarizes what happened as a result of the looting of rare precious antiquities and artifacts, saying Salim bin Uthman's boats carried iron windows, bars, doors, and roofs. Salim carried loads of gold, silver, antiquities, weapons, and copper with him on 1,000 camels, as was rumored. Then he took the horses, mules, camels, and fine marbles. He took the best from everything. Likewise, his ministers seized large amounts of money, and likewise, his soldiers gained untold numbers, and one of them became greater than the fortune of 100 princes or 1,000. This is how Ibn Iyaz explains the looting and stealing that took place during the period of the Ottomans' entry into Cairo. The Ottomans view the matter as the Middle Ages, and the view of the invaders from their point of view, they defeated the Mamluk sultans and conquered Egypt by force, so they shall have everything they want, the country and the people. In their view, this justifies the exploitation of Cairo for several days by the Ottoman military until Salim ordered to stop it when things got out of control. You know what happened after that? Egypt just basically became a taxation spot, a place where people who used to live in stone buildings started living in mud and stuff. Poverty started to rise greatly. So the Ottomans ruined Egypt by transforming its vibrant Mamluk era capital, Cairo, into a provincial backwater and a mere source of taxation and resources, leading to economic decline and cultural stagnation. This shift involved plundering the city, diverting its wealth and power to the imperial centers of Istanbul, and interrupting its crucial role in global trade routes after the discovery of sea routes to Asia. The resulting instability and corruption under a succession of short lived Ottoman governors further worsened the situation for Egypt's people and culture. So I'll ask the question once again, because they love to do it about sub-Saharan Africa as if it's like the only place in Africa that suffered from colonization. What do you think happened between the era of ancient Egypt and today that would make Egypt have less money than people who lived as hunter-gatherers at the same time when they were building giant cities, if the population is exactly the same as what it is today? Did the people become dumber? Did they lose IQ? Were their IQ higher than everybody else in the world during ancient Egypt, and then somehow their IQ just flew out of their head? Or is it because of the thousands of years of colonization, instability, and then even when they recovered from that with the Mamluks, who weren't necessarily even part of their ordinary civilization, you think that then after the Turks came and basically turned it into a hellhole, do you think that had something to do with it? You know, when the British took over Egypt, it had already been depleted. This, by the way, they will never answer. And by the way, they might. You know, I know some people who have some answers for this, but I don't even want to say the answer because it's so racist. You won't even, I will tell you the answer in the comments. I won't even put it in the video because it is so racist against Middle Eastern people.
Brazil, one of the biggest hellholes in the planet. Brazil, a very violent country with over 200 murdered people per 100,000. That's the
Now we're going after Brazil for no reason. But again, he's basically gonna undo his entire point, because his point was your place is not a hellhole if it's got a lot of money. His point is Africa's a hellhole because it doesn't have a lot of money. And now he's naming places that he considers hellholes even though they have a lot of money.
murder rate of Brazil. Brazil kicks Africa's ass. The GDP of Brazil is 1.8 trillion.
So to put that in context, that is up there with almost some of the best countries in America. So 1.7 trillion, that's Spain, 2.3 trillion, Italy, Greece is about 257 billion, which is closer to African countries. But yet somehow Brazil, he names as a hellhole. What's going on here? Is this something a little more important than just plain GDP? Why is Brazil not this heavenly place? Is it because there are some countries in Africa that have a very low crime rate, that are easier to live in, even though they have a very low GDP? And then obviously, if you adjust for cost of living, things change dramatically.
1.8 trillion. It's roughly half of the GDP of the entire continent of Africa. And the population of Brazil is 211 people.
So again, we're doing some weird stereotyping here and adding information and just looking up stats in a weird way. So let's start by this, right? South Africa and Brazil are pretty much comparable in terms of crime. Now, obviously, South Africa is one of the richer countries in Africa, but in fact, it's number one, but its crime rate is pretty high compared to the other countries in Africa. But how is that possible? How is it that a much richer country, it's because of inequality, right? So there are some places in Africa where in South Africa, where you do not want to go. And then there's some places where you're free, it's whatever, which if you have any type of money, that's probably where you're going to live, where there's not a lot of crime. A lot of this crime affects other poor people, right? This is the same for Brazil. There are places in Brazil you wouldn't even worry for 1 second. And then there's places in Brazil where you would be terrified. This is the thing that he's not taking into consideration. He's just grouping in the whole thing. It's like me saying there's parts of America. I mean, I know this for a fact because I watched documentaries of America. There's parts of America, and I'm not going to name any names, where delivery drivers don't even go into those areas. They're so dangerous, right? Like you can't even, houses cost nothing in that area because they're so dangerous. Gun violence is through the roof. Yet if we went, America's a hellhole because look at the gun violence and just group it with one single area. I mean, has the largest amount of population in prison right now in the world, even though they have 300 million people, which is, not that much bigger than Brazil. But you're not going to say the entire country sucks because of that. That would be dumb.
Doesn't even have anything close to the population of Africa, still kicking Africa's ass. And people want to leave Brazil, by the way. I know because I've met numerous Brazilian immigrants, and they tell me they have no interest in going back to Brazil.
So let's try another way, since he doesn't understand anything really. Let's take some countries from Europe with low GDPs but high satisfaction rates. Let's take Czech Republic, for example. So the Czech Republic has 345 billion. That's less than South Africa, by the way. And then there's Slovakia with 141 billion, Hungary with 222 billion. But are these countries hellholes? I don't know. Let's carry on. So if you've ever heard anybody talk about a country that America needs to emulate their medical system, all of that, and blah, 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 Sweden is one of the great examples. Sweden, by the way, is a great contributor to science and stuff like that. Sweden, 610 billion, about 200 billion more than South Africa. Switzerland, 900 billion. Again, still in the billions, not in the trillions yet. Finland, 299 billion. Are these hellholes as well? Greece, right? The founder of Western civilization, ancient Greece, 257 billion, less than South Africa. Croatia, Israel, 540 billion. What I'm trying to show you here is it's not just about GDP. That's not how you measure whether a country is good or not. I mean, would any of you argue that living in Sweden would be pretty okay? Now, of course, some people are going to say, wait a minute, you can't compare those countries. Africa is a lot different than Sweden. Yeah, if you look at each country differently, you're going to find out that each country is different in its own way. South Africa is a hell of a lot different than Uganda. Uganda is a lot different than Rwanda. Rwanda is a lot different than Namibia. These places have their ups and their downs. If you don't like crime, move to Namibia.
Yeah, no, they don't want to go back to Brazil. I come from Rio de Janeiro. I come from Sao Paulo. I don't want to go back. No, I want to stay here in America, teach jiu-jitsu. They don't want to go to Brazil, but Brazil is still kicking Africa's ass. And by the way,
It's also quick kicking Sweden's ass, Greece's ass, Egypt, and all of those other places as well. So when is that video coming out saying that even if you've had an ancient successful civilization, it does not reflect today, as there are many factors that change based on your history alone does not show exactly where you're going to be, especially when there's people who are more menacing than you, who make sure that your country gets thrown down to the ground.
in all fairness, I would choose Brazil over Africa any day.
Well, it depends what for. I mean, if you want to live in Brazil, that seems like a pretty normal place that you can live in. If you want to live in some parts of Africa, you can live in those parts of Africa. It depends what you're trying to live for. But if you're going by GDP, then you should choose Brazil over Sweden. You should choose Brazil over the Czech Republic. You should choose Brazil over Greece, over Italy. The greatest parts of the world, by the way, in history.
Texas is not a country, so to speak, but in a way it is. It's a state of the United States.
Change the goalpost.
In a way, it's like a country in the sense that it has this super powerful economy. And Texas is a state that doesn't really need America too much as far as resources goes, I think.
Oh, so now you know how to separate countries by or states by individual instead of just going for the whole thing. Instead of going for the entire American continent or the continents of America and grouping them as one. Now you know how to split them.
I mean, well, I'm not entirely sure about that, but Texas has oil. Texas has a very powerful economy. Texas is a powerhouse state of America. And Texas, this one state of America, kicks Africa's ass. Okay, the GDP of Texas is 1.9 trillion.
Well, since he's going to play these baby games, I think I have to make a much more important point. If you notice, the countries that have the most amount of money today in Europe, right? So all these other smaller countries that don't make that much money in Europe, you will notice that they were some of the least contributors in colonization, but the ones that had giant empires like France, if you don't know, played a huge role in the empires of Africa, dominating a large place and in the world in general. And then, secondly, on top of that, they were neo-colonialists, instating and also supporting dictators, pitting not only African countries against each other, but also having African countries fight against each other. Germany, of course, we know about its imperialism in Africa and around the world. And then, of course, what it did to Europe. The UK, of course. And I mean, I could literally list more. I mean, America is known to have contributed in especially neo-colonialism. And of course, America, which basically stole tons of lands from different types of people. They even stole lands from their own people. Read up on the Mormons. Then they took lands from the Miami tribe. The New York used to belong to Native Americans. Basically, the whole of America used to belong. But I'm talking about even in the later years, they took land from other people in order to form the United States of America. So, colonizers. We, of course, can't leave slavery behind. One of the places that private companies colonized in Africa was Liberia. So United States colonized Liberia. But if you go look at history books, they say they founded Liberia. They didn't colonize it. They founded it. And then they brought American slaves there and destabilized Liberia forever.
They're kicking Africa's ass. Texas is kicking Africa's ass. New York is kicking Africa's ass. They're not even countries. These are states. I mean, they're kind of like countries, but nonetheless, these are states under Washington, okay, under the empire of Washington. And they're still kicking Africa's ass just by themselves. Like Texas by itself is kicking Africa's ass.
By the way, the video that I added with the girl is making fun of this idea that some states in America that have way higher GDP than some European countries means that those states are way better than those European countries.
So Africa just sucks so hard, okay? Now, India sucks hard, but Africa sucks hard even more.
Yeah, you already said that. Ignorant opinion, and you have no idea about what you're talking about. So, do you have anything else to say?
Okay, Africa sucks harder. Africa is a terrible place. It really is a terrible place. The majority of poverty, starvation is in Africa.
So while it is true that there's extreme poverty in Africa and there's ways of calculating that, a lot of that poverty is based off of the international poverty line, which again does not factor in the cost rate in Africa. For example, for about $2 in Africa, right, which is about 40 Rand in South Africa, you can buy 2 loaves of bread, Coke, and maybe some sweets. As I said again, the cost of living is just not the same. The same product you can get for $3, $2, $5 in America is going to cost you like, I don't know, like a couple cents in Africa, and it's like the same exact product, sometimes with the exact same branding from America.
Africa is the only country in the world that did not see a decrease in political violence in 2020.
Firstly, Africa is not a country. Remember that? What we said earlier. But secondly, Europe, because of the war going on in Europe, went up in violence.
The majority of children who are starving, living in horrendous poverty, are in Africa. It's just I hate talking this way because it sounds like I'm attacking my fellow man.
We can all tell you hate attacking your fellow man. That's why you're making a video based on 1 day's worth of data.
But it's like the more I read about, because I've been reading about Africa for years. I read about, what was going on in the Central African Republic. I read a little bit about the South Sudanese Civil War. I read about what North Sudan was doing to Christian people.
Did you read about the part of the role that the Western countries played in all of those wars? Or did you ignore that part?
I read about the Democratic Republic of Congo. They should get rid of the word democratic.
Of course, you haven't read about how the Congo has been affected by the United States, even now, who was behind DRC's attempted coup and were Americans involved. This, by the way, is from Al Jazeera. The attackers were led by Christian Malanga, a politician and former military officer based in the United States. The Congolese Republic Guard and police block a road around the scene attempting coup in Kinshasa in May 19, 2024.
But I read about that, how they were killing Christians in that place. They were attacking Catholics. It's just like no human being should live like this. No one should live like this. And it's like,
well, I agree with you. Then if you agree, then you should start attacking the capitalists in your country that are using Africa as a training ground for slavery and obsessed with slave wages and funding scammers and places like that, right? These capitalists, by the way, are from all over the world. They recruit Africans to join their scams.
There's nonstop violence going on in this place. They can't stop killing each other. North Mali, for example, look up North Mali and all the horrendous violence that's been going on there for years.
Yeah, why don't you just tell us? How about that?
I mean, for years, this violence has been going on nonstop. You have, what do you call them? Tuareg people, and they want to fight against the government. And then you have the Muslim fundamentalists, and they want to fight against everybody else.
Yeah, and where does Islam come from exactly?
And then you have the Arab nationalists, basically Afro-Arab nationalists, who are pan-Arabs, and they want to fight against everybody else as well. And
There you go. You're getting a little bit closer. So people who are outside of Africa are affecting Africa negatively by bringing in non-African ideas, making Africans fight over concepts which are non-African.
it's just crap. Now you could say, well, Tay, things like this happened in Europe, and they did happen in Europe. But you know what? Europe has been very, very peaceful for over 75 years.
Wait, so are you saying that Europe was once in wars a lot and then it stopped being in wars? Are you saying that that's possible, that things like that can happen? Is that what you're saying? Also, do you know why Europe was in wars at the time? Was Africa poking at them, trying to get them to start fighting each other?
Over 75 plus years, Europe has been very, very peaceful, except for the Balkans. The difference, I would say, is that Europe will go through these great moments of peace and prosperity. Yes, and Europe will have wars, but they stop. They stop eventually.
And they stop in Africa too, as long as the people who are stoking the flames. I mean, if you take the Sudanese wars, which had to do with international countries coming after the resources in the southern parts of Sudan and eventually splitting the countries into two, and then now there's more wars again.
It's like in Africa, there's no, it doesn't end. And also, Europe has this capacity for civilization. A functional economy. You have lots of industry and production. The same goes for North and South America. In Africa, it's like everything sucks there. Everything.
Wait, so in Africa they don't work industry? Is that why Sweden has bases? Well, why Germany and other countries have bases for manufacture in Africa? So for those of you that don't know, Germany has companies, well, BMW, manufacturing cars in South Africa, and they have contracts, and some of these contracts are similar in other parts of Africa in different industries, where Africans are not allowed to build car companies. In other words, they're not allowed to compete in order for them to have these work. So in other words, once they learn how to create cars by having companies inside there, there's a contract stopping them from starting car companies.
Everything sucks. That's why you have so many migrants from Africa. So I want to give you guys some more stats about Africa, why this place sucks. So this is from a website called Children International.
Okay, so this video is going for too long. Thank you very much. I'm going to do a part 2 of what he talks about.